Hey everybody, Spaz here, and thanks for tuning in to an episode of Comic Corn. Today I'm going to give you, hopefully, a brief explanation of my journey back into comics. When I was born actually with visual and hearing problems, and so I had to struggle to hear things. I had to struggle to see things. By the time I was 2 years old, I think I got bottom glasses, the really thick glasses, and I'd crawl along the floor, and I'd sit up right next to the TV set, almost with my nose against the TV set, my hands up on the TV, watching TV, unfortunately blocking it from other family members. Stephen, you make a better door than a window, would always be what my dad would say. But anyway, I was fascinated by things like the monkeys, because there was the visual, the colorful, their zany antics up on screen, and then the music. And of course, I loved music. We grew up listening to the Beatles and things like that. And my dad was a big Sinatra fan. And, we have all our favorite Christmas music played every year. But there's also Batman. And Batman, oh, that was colorful and amazing. Then when I got into comics in 5 years later, I'd be opening up Spider-Man or Superman or Fantastic Four, something like that, and I'd be totally amazed and just by the colors, the way the yellows and the blues and the reds and stuff, and just how they pop off the page, and it was fascinating. And of course, I still had to hold everything up to my face like that, and read it. So I got used to the smell of the paper, and so that's one of the things that reminds me of being a kid, the smell of a comic book. And oddly enough, though, since I was into Batman and stuff, I didn't get into Batman in the comics. Like I said, it was really mostly only Spider-Man and Superman. But we watched the cartoons and all of that kind of stuff, and I was really into that. And about 1973 or so, one of my neighbors, David De Leon, who is now an award-winning makeup artist in L.A., he actually collected horror comics, and one of them freaked him out so much that he gave it to me. And oh my gosh, it was amazing. It was black and white, which was strange for me because I was mostly enchanted by the color. But the horror and the weird stuff that went on, and I was just, oh my gosh, it's crazy. I mean, I'm still trying to find a copy of that weird magazine. I don't know which one it is, but anyway. So I was into the horror, and I loved the horror, and I'd go out and I'd buy crazy things like with my allowance, I'd maybe buy Werewolf by Night or Tomb of Dracula, things like that Marvel put out. But gradually music took over. Music was comics. Everyone thought of them being kid stuff, and trust me, I got bullied enough in school to not want to get bullied any more than that. I mean, I had the bottom glasses, and I probably smelled funny. I don't know. But anyway, so I really got into the music, and then by the time I turned 14, I punk and all this kind of stuff. But along the way, I would still buy Archie Digest or Archie comics and stuff because it was innocent. It was just quick read, colors, and fascinating. And by the 90s, whatever, I started getting into I'd buy some horror paperbacks or whatever I could find of the old horror comics, and I occasionally go through and I'd buy a horror comic here or there from local shops, and I was still keeping on top of the new stuff as well. Occasionally I'd go in, and I remember buying the first couple issues of V for Vendetta, which was very has become legendary. They made a movie out of that series, but basically, look. My nerd credentials are solid in music, and it was focused on that. I couldn't spend money both ways. I couldn't buy comics and music. I would have to be a genius in order to be able to afford that. Unfortunately, I'm not a genius. But by the time, I don't know, last year rolled around, I was unpacking a lot of the stuff I had in storage for 9 years. I was coming across these trade paperbacks I had of old horror comics and a couple maybe a Batman and Joker book or something. And I just started going, man, I got to check and see if there's any local comic shops. I'd like to sort of see what's going on and what's out there and see if I can rebuy some of this old stuff, maybe in book form. And sadly, there was plenty of old horror comics. And I comic shops. And, you know, I went in, first one I went in a local place about a mile away called A1 Comics. And looked around the store for, I don't know, about a half hour or whatever. And then I started talking to a guy there named JW. And I started mentioning that I liked horror stuff. So he suggested to me to pick up the Haunted Horror series on Yo Books. And what the Haunted Horror series does is it takes a lot of those pre-code comics, which is basically everything from like 1955 and before, so like the 40s and 50s, and it reprints them. And so this is like a lot of old horror comics that used to scare the kids way back in the 40s and 50s, but they're all compiled in new books. And Yo Books is a great, great company. Yo as in Y-O-E Books. And I've got probably about 7 or 8 of these and some other books as well. But this was the beginning, and I thought, well, that's it. I'm just going to buy horror books. And when I can afford them, I'm going to, you know. But then all of a sudden I realized, oh, you know what? I used to buy Tomb of Dracula. So, but it's still horror. And look at those colors. I mean, this is even brighter and more beautiful than back in the old days. And then, of course, well, since I had the Tomb of Dracula book, I might as well get the Werewolf by Night book. And so there's a whole bunch of stuff there. So it's like I started thinking to myself, well, you know, I better get the Monster of Frankenstein. So, okay, I was set. I was just going to focus on the monster stuff, or the horror stuff. And I bought some more Yo books, and I bought those, and Man-Thing, and, you know, things with monsters in it and stuff. And I said, you know what? Just horror. No superhero. And then I bought superhero. Like Fantastic Four. And a Spider-Man. And a Batman. And a Superman. And so I started buying these, and I told myself, you know what? I am not going to start buying single issues, because I'm just going to wait till they come out in books, and I'm going to be fine with that. So I started buying single issues when I found something interesting. This one here, this particular Captain America, the only reason I bought this is because it mentions Elvis Costello and Nick Lowe. Yes, true. So I thought that was so cool, and I waited till it was half off, so I only paid a couple dollars for it. And then I told myself, you know what? Okay, I'm only going to buy single issues if they're old, and if they're horror, okay, superhero, you know, such as Captain America, whatever. And then I started stumbling across things like Bedknobs and Broomsticks for, you know, and we're talking going in the 50-cent dollar bins. And so it wasn't really cutting too much into my savings, so to speak. So, you know, I would buy stuff like this, and then, you know, got into, well, gee, here's a Radio Shack thing that has Superman and Wonder Woman in it. Oh, and then I thought, oh my gosh, here's an old, really old comic for 50 cents. Oh my gosh, you know, it fascinates me, even though I wasn't alive when this stuff came out, fascinates me because there was a little kid that bought this. And, you know, read it cover to cover and was fascinated by it. You know, same thing with Herbie. And, you know, then I started buying things just because everyone knows I love 80s music and New Wave. So I bought a couple comics by a superhero team called The New Wave. I mean, but, you know, we're talking it was anywhere from 25, 35, 50 cents to $1. And, you know, then I would buy things like Groovy. And it just, I told myself, forget it. Okay, that's it. And, I mean, look, I'd even buy things like the Lennon Sisters and Little Rascals and Nanny and the Professor and Partridge Family and Flipper and Bob Hope. And I bought this Superboy just because it has Bonnie and Clyde on the front. You know, I'm a big Bonnie and Clyde fan back in 1968. But, you know, I told myself, okay, those are cheap. I got no problem with that. I mean, those were cheap. Wasn't really cutting into my budget. You know, okay, maybe I didn't, you know, I couldn't buy lunch that day if I went and bought 4 or 5 50-cent comics. But that's it. You know, I told myself, forget it. You know, just stick with the cheap and don't get into buying modern stuff, because you're just going to get hooked on it. And yeah, that's right. I'm buying modern comics. and I'm not ashamed. I used to be ashamed. I used to feel that people would make fun of me, but I figured they're making fun of me already. Why not just enjoy comics? And it's fascinating though, because when I go into stores, and this is no joke, when I go into stores, it's like going in and experiencing a record store in the 70s or the 80s where there's every Wednesday's new comic day. So people come in and they're excited, and there's this buzz, and people are walking around with stacks of stuff or they make a list and the store pulls all the new releases for them. And some comics come out with 4, 5, 6, 10 different variant covers, and it's exciting. It reminds me of the days of when a single would come out as a single, and a 7-inch and a 12-inch and a 7-inch picture disc and a 12-inch picture disc, and you had to get them all. And so that's kind of what variant covers are. I don't really buy too many of the variant covers. I will buy one copy of a comic and I'll choose the cover that I prefer. But it's fascinating because people are so into it. They're so excited. They know the ins and outs. It's just like they know the band members and the producers and stuff. It's very much like the music community. The comic community is very, very much like the music community. I am not ashamed anymore to say, I got issue 2 of Superman, or I got issue 7 of Sideways. I know people don't care, but sometimes I like to share that joy and have people go, oh, he's kind of excited about that. And maybe somebody won't go out and buy the comic, but at least they'll say, oh, yeah, that's interesting. Or maybe, just maybe, I might be able to get somebody to go out and check out some of the trade paperbacks. Me talking about comics is not going to get somebody interested in comics. And it's certainly not going to make me cool. But the one thing that I can tell you right now is that it's okay to like comics. I'm not embarrassed about it anymore. I spent years not talking about it. I spent years not collecting it because I thought, it was a financial thing too, obviously, because I couldn't invest too much I could barely afford the music I bought. And that got me into trouble. So I couldn't go out and buy the comics and stuff. And I can't afford both now. So I just have to sort of, like I said, maybe not buy lunch a day or two, or maybe rob a bank or a liquor store. But it's fun. It's exciting. It reminds me of a community, because now you go into a record store, it's not a community. It's just guys working there and people walking in and walking out. There's nobody gathered in the corner talking about a certain, release or whatever. But in comic shops, you do that all the time. You can hold conversations for hours with people in comic stores if you want to learn, or if you want to have a conversation, back and forth. It's fantastic. Thank you for sitting through this, and I hope you learned a little bit about my obsession, and thank you for spending just a little bit of time with me. I appreciate it, and smell you later.